Thank you. Hello, everyone. So I started this project as part of a master thesis, master research I did during my master in education, and I keep on completing it, making it a bit bigger. I did that because as a teacher, as an educator, we know that emotions will trigger long-term memory, which is what we want as educators, for our learners to remember what they learn and what they experience as long as possible. So it's not something we can argue that emotions, whether emotions will trigger or not long-term memory. We know that now. What I was missing as an educator is to have now some kind of differentiation between different types of games based on the emotions they trigger towards the players. So I started it with two games I was using at that time, and we will have a bit more details about that in a moment. Yes. So I think my parents are actually watching it through the live stream. I have an answer for them 25 years almost after the question. Why did you spend that many time playing those two games? That was the games I was playing in my childhood. I have a reason. I have an answer now. It's to get experience of game design, okay? As I believe, like, game designers need to be experienced game players first. So eventually, I might be able to design my own video games. So far, I'm designing my own games to help learning. So the first one is one I have created from zero. So it's a board game that is used as a revision, a little bit like the sustainable game on sustainability with many factors, but this one is about startup and entrepreneurship, because it was one of the classes I'm teaching. The other one is an adaptation of a famous game, Spotted, with the same mechanism, but different levels and with as many elements as we want. So I was using these two adaptations, the game I created and also the adaptation. I adapted Spotted with words of accounting, which was one of the scariest topics I've realized when I started teaching it. So that was the same kind of, matching card memory game when they try to use words from accounting to get used to use them, and then to realize, it's called a diagnosis game, at the end of that short activity, they would realize what games they don't know what is it about, what does it mean, and that's what they're supposed to learn. So based on the different level of complexity, we could have up to between 20 and 55 cards, but you have like a lot of tutorials explaining that on YouTube, actually. That's where I found how to do it. But what I wanted to do, they both work very well, but what I wanted to know is what is the experience of students playing these two games, and if there's one that they prefer instead of the other. So that was the research. At that time, I did the research on two games. On the semester that we just finished, I have done it with another game, a simulation from Harvard Business Review. I think that's the name. On entrepreneurship as well. So I will be able, probably next year and next convention, to also look at the difference in students' perception of their emotional state between board games, simulation, and card games. So in order to measure that, I have used a famous framework from, I guess, almost every game designer. I see some heads nodding. The first one is the player's experience need framework. Satisfaction is the S. Based on those four elements, this is a framework that is used to any kind of games, but I was still missing that element of emotions that I wanted to measure with my students. So I have adapted another concept that is also famous for game design. It's been very well applied to game design by Jesse Shell. Is that the citation? No, that's another one. Jesse Shell, maybe you probably know his book, The 100 Lenses of Game Design. And he really tells us how to apply it in designing games. And I wanted to use that theory of flow to measure which games works best. And the goal of the theory of flow is to position the learners in flow, when the level of the challenges they're facing is matching with their skills. And the problem we have, every trainer and educator, is first in a class, we have 30 students, 30 different levels of skills, and we always have the same activity for everyone. And then we need to gradually add challenges to match with the skills of the learner. Otherwise, they could get bored, or they could get anxious if the level of challenges is too high. So that I wanted to measure that with those two games. So the first results I had, I was witnessing that, but without any big surprise, but I could actually measure it, that the board game, more complex with different elements, and there were elements of strategy as well, because they had 3 different ways to win the competition. If their startup was the richest, if their startup was having the best teams in terms of skills, or if their startup was the most notorious in terms of notoriety points that they were winning during that game. The other one is more simple. You're just playing the game, and in the end you realize if you still know what those words are meaning or not. The board game triggers more positive emotions from the theory of flow. Okay, so more arousal, flow, control, and relaxation. Even if relaxation is not really something you want to aim. You don't want learners to be relaxed for too long. Okay, and then on the theory of flow, you also have, I think, also 4 elements of negative emotions, which is something we want to avoid. And that was a surprise for me because I was not expecting that. From students' feedback, they were enjoying, it seems that they were enjoying a bit more the board game. As it was also revision before the exam, it was a nice activity to do. But that board game also triggers almost 50% more negative emotions. So it allows me to understand that, yes, board games, more complex games are great. We learn more and we remember for longer. But you could also lose your students much faster. And I experienced it actually on the last semester when I'm still continuing that research. When maybe because I'm used to it, I introduced a little less elements of the game, and I've witnessed that more students were not playing it at all in the end. So for the purpose of the research, I let them playing it or not playing it, because I want just to have reliable results. But I've noticed it, that board games are great. As educators or teachers, when we want to do a board game, it's because we love it. But we need also to pass the message on to the students. So it's a bit more difficult for board games. For the PENS framework, there were quite kind of equivalent still. Yes, that gift is something you don't want to see, right? Especially not in a class. It's still similar in terms of experience of need, satisfaction, whether you use a diagnosis game, a simple card game, or a complex board game, it's quite similar. But the difference is really in terms of emotions. So I qualify those 2 types of games as the first one, it's like doing a roller coaster. I know some people are sick by roller coasters, but it's like an emotional roller coaster. It triggers much more positive emotions, so more long-term memory, so more actually ultimate goal for teachers is to have people remember, but also more negative emotions, so it needs to be taken with a lot of care. And since I realized that, I think I'm spending about half an hour to introduce the game, but to introduce the learning outcomes of the games and how it's going to match with the desired learning outcome of the class and how it's going to help them having better grades. Because if students are playing a game in a class, it's for having better grades. Otherwise, they don't do anything. As long as it's not clearly matching with the grades. And card games are still a very good tool to put them in a safe ambience, especially when it's a difficult topic. I'm thinking about probably programming an SQL database. It could be also something useful for accounting, for business students. Even if they're called business students, accounting is still the black sheep. For future development, now I'm working on having more quantitative data, more qualitative as well. I'm planning of doing a few interviews of using the famous Ishikawa 5 whys, asking why 5 times, so why did they experience better, did they have better experience? Based on their answer, why is that? So then we could have much deeper knowledge about what triggers those positive or negative emotions. Okay, so I will interview a few students based if they were having negative emotions and also positive emotions to have a bit more knowledge about it. The final goal of that is to be able to have some kind of framework to differentiate different types of games and towards the emotions that those games are giving or making the students have. So thank you for your attention. I think I might be around 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Xavier. Very nice. We have time for 2-3 questions. Sam, very active today.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation. Did you try to introduce that game to non-business students? Because your analytics is very interesting. I would like to know if you can make the same stats with non-business students, because it may give an insight.
Not yet, because I need to have the players playing the game, and the board game, it takes about an hour. I developed a shorter version of it. It's like a bit like Monopoly when you start with more cards to make the game faster, you know. If you start from 0, it's 1 hour and a half. If you start with the faster version, it's half an hour, 40 minutes. I didn't test it yet with non-business students. My HR manager tested it. She bought it for her nephew. I think I've sold about 25 games so far. So it's like, you're growing your startup. And it's like a Monopoly, kind of, but without cards. The cards are just like scenario of project, whether you can have it or not. And then you're partnering with the other players to put your team in common so you can have better project with more rewards. And 3 ways to win in the end. So it's also a nice strategy game, but for kids up to 10, 12 years old so far, from what I've witnessed. I'm not sure, I would love to, but I'm not sure how I could ask them to maybe have an interview, but that's interesting as well. Maybe in the future. Yeah.
Thanks. Another question?
These questionnaires you did about emotions, first of all, are these standard questionnaires? And secondly, how reliable are they in general? Can people actually say, and are they open about saying what emotions there are and what they think?
I'm asking them if they were experiencing a certain emotions, so then I could link back to the models. I'm not sure I understood your first question. Maybe you could...
Is this a standard questionnaire for emotion elicitation?
Yeah. The PENS framework is the standard questionnaire for that is used in game design in general, so I just use the same questions. Okay. I wanted to have elements also of emotions, so that is not a standardized questionnaire, but I have used the wheel of flow of the psychologist, Csikszentmihalyi. And so that is standardized. I just use the same kind of format of questions, like where you're experiencing arousal. I just had to give synonyms, because they're not English native speakers. And for all those 8 emotions, I just added 8 questions, actually, to the PENS framework to have more emotions.
Thank you. We have to stop now.
Thank you.
You are available the whole day, I think.
Yeah.
So, if you have more questions, we can interact during breaks, etc.